making free speech pronouncements. As far as I can see, I can't write a treatise on the First Amendment in this case, said Justice Stephen G. Breyer, who added later, I would be frightened to death to write a standard. The justices didn't make it easy for themselves or lawyers representing former student Brandy Levy. The school board that upheld her suspension and the federal government, which has sided with school administrators. The justices' free speech hypotheticals included inflammatory praise or disdain for Black Lives Matter, Antifa, or the Proud Boys, bringing Confederate flags to school, criticizing teachers, undermining the authority of coaches, and punishing students who use male pronouns for transgender girls. At one point, Justice Elena Kagan seemed critical of the government's wide definition of the kind of school speech by students that would allow authorities to step in. Everything that mentions a school at all is school speech, right? She also pressed the ACLU lawyer David Cole about whether school administrators are helpless when they see toxic behavior on the web, such as boys creating a website to rank girls on their appearance and sexual activity. So you can read the rest of this yourself. We're at the top of the hour, so we're going to be passing it over. But I think this is a pretty big deal. Why should these schools have any say about what happens outside of school? They should not. That's not their business. We'll cover one more thing before we pass it over.
We can actually, if you actually want to solve a problem, I've sent a bill to take a close look at it. We also have to get at the root problem of why people are fleeing, particularly to our southern border from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And a bill to violence, the corruption, the gangs, the political instability. And ask Vice President Harris to lead our diplomatic effort to take care of this.
Oh my God, that was great. That was hilarious.
Well, if you remember when he was criticized for going down to Cancun.
Yeah. That's what he's dreaming of when he has to listen to Joe Biden. That was so funny. And the My Pillow one was pretty funny also. Yep. Good Lord. I'll tell you, it's just insane. The stuff that we are dealing with now. It's crazy. All right.
Breaking?
Hey, what's going on? It's interesting you bring up the previous article because that's actually my leadoff article tonight out of a different source. So I'm actually going to cover that a little bit more in depth here tonight out of Liberty Nation and get a little perspective out of a couple of the other Supreme Court justices as well.
Really? That's good. I mean, I just think that this is where we're at now in America. This is America now, apparently. It's just like a nanny state.
That it is.
A police state, nanny state. How disgusting.
Well, so long as you don't smoke menthol cigarettes, you're good to go.
Yeah, for now, and then it'll be something else, and then something else. Yeah, I don't think the BLM folks are going to be too happy about this menthol cigarette thing.
Well, and I kind of brought this up last night because we actually did broadcast the State of the Union, if you want to call it that, with Biden last night, and they got talking about that, and I says, you know who this is actually going to go after? It says it's going to go after the blacks because at the end of the day, you primarily see a lot of blacks that smoke menthols, right?
Yeah.
And lo and behold, wouldn't you know that an article comes through here today stating exactly that out of the ACLU. Oh, you gotta be kidding me.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
Well, I think it's absolutely true. And I just think it's, again, like stupidity. It's just more nanny state garbage. Trying to change people's this is behavioral conditioning. You know, when they did the additional tax on things like soda and stuff like that, they're trying to condition people's behavior, and I think that's wrong.
Well, and on top of that, it's just a huge money grab. It's a tax. I've often said this, if I were to run for office, I would run on a campaign of a 100% tax. And here's why. Because it's never enough. At the end of the day, you can tax people 100% of their labor, and it would never be enough.
Yeah.
And frankly,
true.
I think it'd be a good running campaign to open people's eyes to say, look, it doesn't matter if it's 50%, 40%, 30%, 100%. It's never going to be enough for these guys. They want the world, and they're going to continue to print money left and right to do as they wish.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Menthols are kind of gross. I don't like them either, Rottweil. I do not smoke cigarettes though, but I used to a long time ago, and I do not anymore. Thank goodness. I smoked Camels back in the day. Yeah.
Oh my.
Can you imagine? Oh my goodness. I'm so glad I don't smoke anymore. And I don't even smoke e-cigarettes anymore either. So I'm pretty boring now.
Yeah, soon breathing will be banned, SDT says. Yeah, that's part of your CO2 tax right there.
Well, yeah, well, you can breathe in, you just can't breathe out.
Oh,
There you go.
is that following the Clinton model?
Hopefully not.
Yeah,
that model is not very healthy or nor life allowing.
crazy.
Yeah, Camel has that creepy, if you go back and look at their advertisements, they have really creepy stuff in their ads. They have like sexual imagery embedded in their advertisements and stuff. It's really gross. You should look into that at some point, everybody, if you have not looked at that yet. It's pretty bizarre, the kinds of things they used to hide like in advertising, and in Disney movies and stuff, all the subliminal nonsense. Yeah, they've been doing this to us for a long time. Social engineering, nudging.
Well, and maybe there's a hidden agenda behind this as well, because I don't know if you've seen over the last year plus of COVID, coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, those who smoke, coincidentally, are not getting the coronavirus, or if they are, they're not getting it as bad.
Really?
So I wonder if there's some sort of linkage between either nicotine and or tobacco use and SARS-CoV-2.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'd like to see what's up with that. That is weird.
Well, here's a weird thing. Menthol, right? In particular, I wonder if chemically, if it's in the lungs, and since this is supposed to be a respiratory thing, if that is a linkage there. And if they figured that out and they take that away, in the predominant community that purchases menthols, what would that do? Well, anyway, you can draw your own conclusions from that, but we're turning it over.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks for being here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, how are we doing tonight? It's good to be here tonight. I got an interesting show lined up, as I alluded to with Radix's MSN article here. I'm going to delve into that a little bit more, touch upon some other educational things that I've come across here in recent days as well, and we'll give that a go. So here we go. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Like I said, it's good to be here on a Thursday night with you guys. Good to have you aboard. If you're on D Live, good to see you. We are over on all the various platforms. I believe we're still up on Vaughn. We are up over on Trovo. We are over on the Foxhole app. So if you're joining over there, good to see you, as well as our friends over at the Tiger Network. And of course, I think we're still over on Roku for a few of you guys who are able to still get that platform. So that being said, let's jump right in. I do have a little bit of a full slate here this evening. So again, touching upon what Radix brought up, this is from a little bit different source. Liberty News, Liberty Nation rather, had the Supreme Court, will it split the free speech baby? Well, say it if you will, but prepare for the consequences. This by Lisa K. Donner. In recent days, says when 14-year-old Brandy Levy had a temper tantrum on Snapchat 4 years ago, little did she know she would pay for her outburst and become the poster child for off-campus free speech rights. The former high school cheerleader was punished for her online conniption by Pennsylvania's Mahoney area high school, and whether school authorities had the right to discipline her has been argued on up the legal food chain to the U.S. Supreme Court, and what many are saying will likely prove to be a momentous decision. Levy has landed at the center of the free speech maelstrom. So the tangled web, well, on its face, the off-campus speech rights of public school students appears to be an open and shut case for lovers of liberty. However, Levy's legal battle is filled with nuance and carries with it many complex contours. It all began when the cheerleader had a meltdown and threw out the F-bomb on social media platform Snapchat. The fact that everything on Snapchat is erased within 24 hours mattered not, because her outburst was noticed by school officials who used it as the reason to suspend her from the cheerleading squad. What resulted was 4 years of legal battles before numerous courts. Even the Biden administration has weighed in on this one. Still, this case is an uncommon mix of political alliances. Imagine the Pennsylvania American Civil Liberties Union and the Alliance Defending Freedom and the Christian Legal Society on the same side. David Cole, the attorney set to argue the case in front of the Supreme Court this week, was quoted in a prominent Washington newspaper as saying, "You won't find another case in the past decade with such a diverse range of groups on the same side. Strange political bedfellows, indeed." Central to determining an outcome is the query: where does the schoolyard end? Not only was Levy's rant posted only on a social media platform rather than uttered on the school grounds, but also was done on a weekend and not connected to a school event, per se. So, what could be the problem here? Well, if you tease out a student's right to free speech, many legitimate areas of concern go from harmless to life-threatening. What if a smart aleck decides to post the answers to an exam online? Another student chooses to put up pictures of a schoolmate engaged in sexual activity. Or worse, another repeatedly encourages a youngster to commit suicide. On the other hand, one could reasonably argue that schools have no right to police what students say 24/7. The ACLU's Whittold, Vic Walchek, made the case to PennLive.com that giving schools this type of power over a student is likely to create a monster, and that is super dangerous. Not only would students like Brandy not be able to express non-threatening, non-harassing bursts of frustration, but it would give schools the possibility of regulating important political and religious speech, Walchek said. The Freedom Forum Institute posits, though public school students do possess First Amendment freedoms, the courts allow school officials to regulate certain types of student expression. For example, school officials may prohibit speech that substantially disrupts the school environment or that invades the rights of others. Many courts have held that school officials can restrict student speech that is lewd. Now, that may sound black and white, but in reality, it has turned out to be many shades of gray. The last time the U.S. Supreme Court decided a student speech rights case of this magnitude was back in the days of anti-Vietnam War protests. In Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District, the High Court found 7-2 in favor of Mary Beth Tinker. It ruled Tinker was not being disruptive when she wore a black armband to school to protest the Vietnam War. Since then, several current Supreme Court Associate Justices have weighed in on Tinker and similar cases in the lower courts. Justice Clarence Thomas wrote that the U.S. Constitution does not protect student speech in public schools, and Morse versus Frederick. Justice Sonia Sotomayor sided with a school district in yet another case when she was on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. Here lies a case where political, ideological, and philosophical differences do not appear to matter, and justices may have to play Solomon and split the baby in two to render a decision that a majority can support. Who knows where the wind will blow on this one? So there you have it. In a nutshell, where things reside, at least at the moment anyway. Who knows exactly where this thing is going to go? Personally, my gut feel is leave it alone. She's well within her right. Who cares if you're a little bit offended? The school has no right. And take, for example, what has been playing out with COVID, for example, all the online classes. Okay, you're doing that in the confines of your home. Okay, yeah, you're dialing into your school teacher. What right does a school teacher have to impose anything upon you when you're within your home? How many cases do you recall seeing over the last year of people being ratted out by others in a Zoom class, if you will, or teachers for things that they saw in the background that they were, quote unquote, offended by? Yeah, tough shit is what I say about it. But nonetheless, all right, so that being said, let me get on to some other stuff here in regards to education. Obviously, for those paying attention, and over the last couple of years, we're well aware of the 1619 project. Obviously, critical race theory is picking up steam. You know, Trump, before he left office, sought to eliminate a lot of this quote unquote training and whatnot throughout many of the government agencies. But since leaving office, it seems like it's picked up steam. Even here in Illinois, they were trying to embed it. Matter of fact, wirepoints.org yesterday picked up some hot mic stuff from some folks in that up north who are just basically saying, yay, social justice warrior all day long. It's my cup of tea, basically. And that's what we get to look forward to. So Real Clear Investigations had this piece says, critical race theory is about to face its days in court. This via John Morosky in recent days as well. Says, as recently as last summer, few people outside academia had heard of critical race theory, whose central claim is that racism, not liberty, is a founding value and guiding vision of American society. Then President Trump issued an executive order last September banning the teaching of this malign ideology to federal employees and federal contractors. Trump's ban was blocked by a federal judge in December and immediately revoked by Joe Biden upon occupying the White House in January. Since then, federal agencies and federal contractors have resumed staff training on unconscious bias, microaggressions, systemic racism, and white privilege, some of the most common but also most disputed concepts associated with the 4-decade-old academic theory. Now, critical race theory is about to face a major real-world test, a spate of lawsuits alleging that it encourages discrimination and other illegal policies targeting whites, males, and Christians. But unlike Trump's executive order, which ran into First Amendment problems by prohibiting controversial speech, the lawsuits name specific policies and practices that allegedly discriminate, harass, blame, and humiliate people based on their race. The common thread of these legal challenges is the inescapable logic that making accommodations for critical race theory will erode the nation's anti-discrimination law, as it has developed since the 1960s. And remind me, toward the end of this, I'm going to circle back to the 1960s on what I just wrapped up here this morning on my broadcast. It says this would mean replacing the colorblind ideal of treating all people equally, which has been widely viewed as the crowning achievement of the civil rights movement, with a contrary strategy, implementing race-based policies which can range from affirmative action to reparations for compensating African Americans for the injustices of the past and for producing equitable outcomes in the future. Critical race theory is a Trojan horse of sorts, said David Pivtorek, a LA lawyer representing two white men who are suing two California state environment agencies. It disguises itself as the gold standard of fairness and justice, but in fact relies on vilification and the idea of permanent oppressor and oppressed races. Its goal is not ensuring that all people play by the same rules, regardless of race, but equity, which is a euphemism for race-based outcomes. About a dozen lawsuits and administrative complaints have been filed since 2018, with another wave planned this summer by conservative public interest law firms and private attorneys. Their goal is to draw attention to some of the more pronounced practices and win court judgments to slow down the spread of CRT in K-12 schools, government agencies, and other organizations. A pair of lawsuits filed in 2019 by 4 white women against the New York City public school system alleged that a diversity trainer told employees white colleagues must take a step back and yield to colleagues of color, and that they should recognize that values of white culture are supremacist. The California suit filed last year by the 2 white men alleges that the state hosted a discussion series in 2020 in which speakers stated that any disparate outcomes in society must be the result of white supremacy. And I guess I'll pause right quick there to highlight the fact that wasn't it just today we saw old Shifty Schiff come out and make similar comments about terrorism and white supremacy and everything else? Shifty Schiff. Why is that jackass not behind bars? Soon. A 2019 complaint filed by an Illinois public school teacher led to a finding that as part of a year-long course on equity and diversity, 7th and 8th graders participated in a white privilege awareness exercise that required them to remain in silence and with eyes lowered as they responded to a facilitator's prompts. A 2020 lawsuit filed by a 12th grade biracial student and his African American mother says that a civics class in a Nevada charter school taught that reverse racism doesn't exist and that people of color cannot be racist. Critical race theory scholars assured Real Clear Investigations that white people should never be fired, penalized, or gratuitously humiliated for the historical accident of being born white. But organizations should be granted wide leeway in adapting diversity training and equity policies. They say, even if asking white people to acknowledge their unearned privilege and think about their complicity in white supremacy makes them feel singled out and induces anxiety. Part of being an employee or a public official or a school teacher requires you to appreciate your own standing, your identity, and your positionality, said Margaret Burnham, a law professor at Northeastern University and a former Massachusetts state judge, using CRT terms that describe racial and gender power hierarchies. Anything that is about the education of the person so that they can do a better job is fair game, Burnham said. Just like you have to learn new technologies, new languages. I consider this part of being an employee, part of being in a public space where you're going to interact with other people. Proponents of critical race theory say the lawsuits are a form of white denialism that confirms the pervasiveness of the problem that CRT exposes. Many critical race theorists believe that the United States has functioned as an elaborate affirmative action scheme to empower and enrich white males, a strategy that depends on a certain degree of cover-up. I see these lawsuits as a last gasp attempt of those who benefit from the racial hierarchy to cling to the power and the privileges that have been associated with whiteness from the beginning of the country, said Andre Douglas Pond Cummings, who writes his name in lowercase letters, a business law professor at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, who has taught courses on corporate justice and hip-hop and the American Constitution. Oh, I guess sign me up. Critical race theory challenges the very legitimacy of the legal system in which these lawsuits are situated. Cummings said, treating people with dissimilar histories equally, where some have been historically oppressed, can lead to unjust results and outcomes, thereby requiring a focus on results and outcomes, not on blind process. with the goal being equal economic opportunity and equity. The central unifying insight of critical race theory is that racism is embedded in the U.S. legal system and social structures, so that you don't have to think about it anymore, and you can have racism without racists at this point, said Robert Wesley, a Tulane University law professor who specializes in critical race theory and reparations. You don't have to be an avowed racist in order for there to be race-based outcomes in the society, Wesley said, noting that confronting these matters is going to entail talking about things that make a lot of people very uncomfortable. CRT rejects the foundational premises of classical liberalism, such as legal neutrality and individual rights. And from that perspective, colorblindness is not understood as a strategy to overcome racism, but as a method to perpetuate it. It's a white ideology, Burnham said. Colorblindness really comes into fashion as a means of denying the persistence of racial stratification in the United States. The lawsuits face a number of challenges. A point born out of early setbacks, some of the claims of experience so far, including the defeat of Trump's executive order on free speech grounds. In another case, lawyers dropped the discrimination allegations in one of the first such lawsuits, filed in 2018 against the Santa Barbara Unified School District in California, because, they said, students and staff who supported the lawsuit were deathly afraid of repercussions if they spoke out and came forward publicly as plaintiffs. Claimants generally have to prove the alleged discrimination is severe and pervasive. They also have to overcome the freedom of speech rights of those who are professing to be dismantling systemic racism. What's more, lawyers on both sides say that courts traditionally defer to employers and educators to set policy on workplace training and classroom curricula, a built-in restraint on activist judges. Perhaps the biggest wildcard in these lawsuits is a staggering cultural shift of the past 5 years, during which many of the precepts of CRT have become widely accepted, especially among many in the nation's intelligentsia and the professional managerial class. President Biden has adopted the language and made equity part of his platform, including a proposal to establish an equity commission to support the rights of Black, Brown, and Native farmers. Immediately upon taking office, he issued an executive order on advancing racial equity to address systemic racism and affirmatively promote equity and racial justice in the federal government. Our nation deserves an ambitious whole-of-government equity agenda that matches the scale of the opportunities and challenges that we face, the executive order states. And last week, Biden's Education Department proposed new priorities for its American history and civics education programs in recognition that the COVID-19 pandemic and the ongoing national reckoning with systemic racism have highlighted the urgency of improving racial equity throughout our society. The priorities include incorporating diverse perspectives and anti-racist practices into the teaching of history, with the New York Times 1619 Project cited as an example. This paradigm shift has catapulted anti-racist experts like diversity trainer and best-selling white fragility author Robin DiAngelo into the stratosphere of fame. Another beneficiary of the zeitgeist is Ibram X. Kendi, the Andrew W. Mellon Professor in the Humanities at Boston University, who runs the school's Center for Anti-Racist Research. Kendi is the author of the 2019 bestseller, How to Be an Anti-Racist, which contains a succinct anti-racist formula that rests on the distinction between bad discrimination, racism, and good discrimination. Anti-racism. The only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. The nation's current anti-discrimination law does not make such a distinction and would read Kendi's proposal as absurd, as claiming that there's a meaningful difference between good theft and bad theft. Instead, all discrimination is wrong in the existing legal framework, with the exception of limited, narrowly tailored exemptions that are subject to strict scrutiny by the courts. A sampling of recent lawsuits and complaints shows how critical race theory practices have played out in a variety of circumstances. And I think I will cut from that there because this seems to be a lot longer than I remembered. But nonetheless, I think you kind of get the idea where this is headed. As a matter of fact, if you recall here in the last couple of days, I believe that Trump issued a statement out of his office of the President 45 that there has been some legal discrimination by the Ag Department as well. And some of the benefits in that going to farmers of color and other races and not to white farmers, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, but I think that we are well suited to combat this, each and every one of us. And I'll show you here momentarily how. So this morning, if you joined me on the broadcast, one of the things that I covered, and I have been going through Ayn Rand's The Virtue of Selfishness. Chapter 17 this morning that we got into talked exclusively about racism. And of course, Ayn Rand had a lot to say about it and the nefariousness behind it. Couple that with the fact that all men are supposed to be created equal as defined in our Constitution, as well as our Declaration of Independence. And so I would encourage folks, if you have the time and wherewithal, do sit back and listen to the 6 installments that I went through for Ayn Rand's The Virtue of Selfishness, because quite frankly, a lot of the things that she talked about back in 1962, 1963, 1964, in which a lot of these essays were penned, also play very well to what is going on here today. And look for that. I'll have that up on the archive channels here probably a little bit later on tonight as well. So that being said, what is going on with our education? Well, Soko turned me on to a book called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America by Charlotte Iserbyt. And I'm going to read a few quips out of this particular book as far as we have gotten so far to just give you an idea of why we are seeing this play out the way we are. It's no mistake. It's not an accident that we're seeing this play out right now at this particular time. This has been long in the making. And so much, like I said, I'm going to read a few quips out of this that I think are pretty interesting in regards to where we're at. But much of this book contains quotes from government documents detailing the real purposes of American education. Here's the bullet items. To use the schools to change America from a free individual nation to a socialist global state, just one of many socialist states which will be subservient to the United Nations Charter, not the United States Constitution. To brainwash our children starting at birth to reject individualism in favor of collectivism. To reject high academic standards in favor of OBE, outcome-based education, ISO 1400, 9000 egalitarianism. To reject truth and absolutes in favor of tolerance, situational ethics, and consensus. To reject American values in favor of internationalist values, aka globalism. To reject freedom to choose one's career in favor of the totalitarian K through 12 school to work OBE process, aptly named limited learning for lifelong labor, coordinated through United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, otherwise known as UNESCO. And so that's one of a few clips. I'm going to bounce through here, so bear with me here a little bit. Let's see here if I can jump to page 26. Scroll, scroll, scroll. I got a few of these marked out here. Let's see, 24, 25, 26. There we go, into chapter 1 of this book. And let's see. Sowing of the Seeds is chapter 1. Ah, yes. The first experiment with outcome-based education, OBE as referred to, began in 1862. Was conducted in England in 1862. Teacher opposition resulted in abandonment of the experiment. Don Martin of University of Pittsburgh, George E. Overholt, and Wayne J. Urban of Georgia State University wrote Accountability in American Education, a Critique. There's a Princeton book dating back to 1976, containing a section entitled Payment for Results, which chronicles the English experiment. The following excerpt outlines the experiment. The call for sound and cheap elementary instruction was answered by legislation passed by Parliament during 1862, known as the Revised Code. This was the legislation that produced payment for results, the 19th century English accountability system. The opposition to the English payment for results system, which arose at the time of its introduction, was particularly interesting. Teachers provided the bulk of the resistance, and they based their objections on both educational and economic grounds. They abhorred their narrowness and mechanical character the system imposed on the educational process. They also objected to the economic burden forced upon them by basing their pay on student performance. Interesting. And what do we see teachers do today? Are they not based on the same things by whether or not kids can spit facts back out on paper via test, right? Let's jump down to page 28. Psychology by John Dewey, the father of progressive education, was published in 1896. This was University of Chicago Press, Chicago, 1896. This was the first American textbook on the revised subject of education. Psychology would become the most widely read and quoted textbook used in schools of education in this country. Just prior to the publication of his landmark book, Dewey had joined the faculty of the Rockefeller Endowed University of Chicago as head of the combined departments of philosophy, psychology, and pedagogy, teaching, and in that same year, 1895, the university allocated $1,000 to establish a laboratory in which Dewey could apply psychological principles and experimental techniques to the study of learning. The laboratory opened in January 1896 as the Dewey School, later to become known as the University of Chicago Laboratory School. Dewey thought of the school as a place where his theories of education could be put into practice, tested, and scientifically evaluated. Dewey sought to apply the doctrines of experience and experiment to everyday life, and hence to education, seeking via this model institution to pave the way for the schools of the future. There he had put into actual practice three of the revolutionary beliefs he had culled from the new psychology: that to put the child in possession of his fullest talents, education should be active rather than passive; that to prepare the child for a democratic society, the school should be social rather than individualist; and that to enable the child to think creatively, experimentation rather than imitation should be encouraged. And let me jump over to a couple other pages here, beginning on page 30 here. And let's see here, the Turning of the Tides, early 20th century. This is chapter 2. Interesting piece here. 70 years later, the carefully laid plans to change America from a sovereign constitutional republic with a free enterprise economics base to just one of many nations in an international socialist system, the New World Order, are apparent. Only a dumbed-down population with no memory of America's roots as a prideful nation could be expected to willingly succumb to the global workforce training plan by the Carnegie Corporation and the John D. Rockefellers, 1 and 2, in the early 20th century, which is being implemented by the United States Congress in the year 1999. Flashing forward, let's talk a little bit about the old Carnegie folks. Well, in 1905, the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching was founded. In 1905, Henry S. Pritchett served as the foundation's first president. Pritchett was the author of What is Religion and Other Student Questions from 1906, Relations of Denominations to Colleges in 1908, and A Woman's Opportunities in Christian Industry and Business in 1907. Here we also saw in 1906, the National Education Association was officially chartered. 1908, we had the Italian educator, the late Maria Montessori, developed the method of teaching, relying on guidance and training of senses rather than more rigid control of children's activities. Then we also get down to 1913. John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s director of charity for the Rockefeller Foundation. Frederick T. Gates set up the Southern Education Board, which was later incorporated into the General Education Board in 1913, setting in motion the deliberate Dumbing Down of America. The Country School of Tomorrow, Occasional Papers Number 1, General Education Board from 1913, written by Frederick T. Gates, contained a section entitled A Vision of the Remedy, in which he wrote the following. It says, is there aught of remedy for this neglect of rural life? Let us, at least, yield ourselves to the gratifications of a beautiful dream that there is. In our dream, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hand. The present educational conventions fade from our minds, and, unhampered by tradition, we work our own good will upon a grateful and responsive rural folk. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or of science. We are not to raise up from among them authors, orators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians, nor will we cherish even the humbler ambition to raise up from among them lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen, of whom we now have ample supply. That's what they think of you, folks, as far back as 1913. A lot of things happened in 1913, didn't it? And so, that being said, where do we go from here? Well, perhaps the COVID business has been a bit of a blessing in disguise. Why? Well, if you go back over the last year plus, obviously a lot of folks at home from work, home from school, doing online learning, etc. Epoch Times had this dating back to March here, says homeschooling nationwide doubled during pandemic, Census Bureau says. The number of American households homeschooling their children has seen a 100% increase amid the COVID-19 pandemic, according to a report recently released by the U.S. Census Bureau. The report is part of the federal agency's mass-scale online household pulse survey, which asks American families about how the pandemic has affected their lives from education to employment to food security and household spending in order to better support the nation's recovery. Specifically, the Bureau compared survey results from 2 7-day periods in the spring and fall of 2020 to offer a glimpse of the pandemic's impact on homeschooling. Last spring, from April 23rd to May 5th, about 5.4% of U.S. households with school-aged children reported homeschooling, according to the report. By the fall, September 30th to October 12th, the percentage more than doubled to 11.1%. The Bureau noted that household homeschooling rates had remained steady at around 3.3% since 2012, citing previous survey results. The Bureau said the survey purposefully asked the question in a way to ensure households are reporting true homeschooling and not just remote learning at home through a public or private school. It says it's clear that in an unprecedented environment, families are seeking solutions that will reliably meet their health and safety needs, their childcare needs, and the learning and socio-emotional needs of their children, the report stated. From the much-discussed pandemic pods to a reported influx of parent inquiries about standalone virtual schools, private schools, and homeschooling organizations, American parents are increasingly open to options beyond the neighborhood school. According to the report, some U.S. states had much larger increases in homeschooling rates for the 2020-2021 school year than others. Several states have seen double-digit percentage increases, namely Alaska, will start off at about 17.9%, Florida 13.1%, Vermont 12.8%, Oklahoma 12.4%, Mississippi 11.6%, West Virginia 11.2%, Massachusetts 10.6%, Nevada 10.6%, and Montana 10.1%. Among 15 of the nation's largest metropolitan areas, Detroit at 12.0 and Phoenix 10.6 and Boston at 8.0 saw the most significant increase in homeschooling rates. While homeschooling rates increased in every racial and ethnic group, the report noted that the change was the most dramatic among Black households. The percentage of Black families who reported they were homeschooling their children jumped from 3.3% in the spring to 16.1% in the fall. For Hispanic households, the rate jumped from 6.2% to 12.1%, and 4.9% to 8.8% for Asian households. and from 5.7 to 9.7% for non-Hispanic white households. The Bureau cited a number of factors that could have been driven American families to homeschool their children, including local homeschooling variation that predated the pandemic, local rates of CCP virus infections, and local decisions about how schools are being conducted during the pandemic. The Household Pulse Survey is currently conducting its third survey, which began October 28, 2020, and is expected to continue through March 2021. Only those whose addresses have been selected by the Bureau to participate can participate in the survey. So again, perhaps the COVID business is a bit of a blessing in disguise. People are realizing the ridiculousness of the BS that the administrators of these schools, the school boards, the critical race theory garbage and that are trying to spew into the minds of kids. And again, highlighting the book that I just covered here, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. People are waking up. They're seeing us for what it is. And thank God it couldn't happen sooner. That being said, let's carry on the theme of homeschooling. Went back through the old archives and found a good Aaron Elizabeth article out of Health Nut News from 2019. Says homeschooling could be the smartest way to teach kids in the 21st century. Here are 5 reasons why. It says homeschooling has changed a great deal. What began in the 1980s and 90s primarily as a way for Catholic parents to infuse religion into their kids' education now has more mainstream appeal. Homeschooled kids have the same access to online learning, friendships, and extracurricular activities as the typical public school students, but without many of the drawbacks, like standardized lesson plans and bullying. Besides the obvious issue of vaccine exemptions being taken away in many states, here are some reasons homeschooling makes sense. Personalized learning is a strong method of instruction. The core idea of homeschooling is the idea that kids need to learn at the speed and in the style most appropriate for them. And the educational world enthusiasts call the approach personalized learning, and it's in place in a number of schools already. Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg are big fans of personalized learning since it tends to use technology as a way to tailor lesson plans to students. In a recent blog post, Gates pointed to research that personalized learning helps boost scores in reading and math. Homeschooling parents can take the method a step further. As parents, many are in the best position possible to know and provide the right kind of instruction. Students can learn more about what they really care about. Without formal curricula to guide their education, homeschoolers get the chance to explore a range of topics that might not be normally offered until high school or college. They can study psychology in 4th grade or finance in 8th grade. Some parents are capable enough to pass on this knowledge themselves, but many parents, Business Insider has spoken with, rely on online learning platforms like Khan Academy or workbooks. Some take their older kids to local community colleges. While many homeschool families do teach English, math, science, and history, education is by no means limited just to those subjects. And students don't deal with cliques or bullying. Homeschoolers don't deal with all the downsides of being around kids in a toxic school environment. Plenty of critics argue these downsides are actually good for toughening kids up. But kids who are bullied more often face symptoms of depression and anxiety, do worse in class, and show up to school less frequently. Homeschool kids are able to learn in a more harmonious environment. And schooling isn't set apart from the real world. Contrary to the name, homeschooling takes place in an actual home only a fraction of the time. A great deal of instruction happens in community colleges, at libraries, or in the halls of local museums. These experiences have the effect of maturing kids much more quickly and cultivating a trait of open-mindedness, as Harvard Jr. and former homeschooler Claire Dixon told Business Insider. Since kids spend more time around adults in the real world, they rarely come to see school as set apart from other aspects of life. And students may achieve more in the long run. Homeschooling makes sense from an achievement point of view. Research suggests homeschooled children tend to do better on standardized tests, stick around longer in college, and do better once they're enrolled. A 2009 study showed that the proportion of homeschoolers who graduated from college was about 67%, while among public school students it was 59%. Students from Catholic and private schools fell even lower in college graduation rates, with 54% and 51% of kids respectively completing all 4 years. So again, very, very interesting findings there. And of course, how many of you guys out there are in the business of homeschooling at this point? Frankly, I see very little downside risk to doing that. Yes, many of us who are working from home may at some point actually have to go back into the office. Maybe not. I don't know. Perhaps you can work something out with your employer to work more from home than in office, or take it down to 1 or 2 days, whatever it is. But nonetheless, what is the incentive at this point to put your kids through any sort of indoctrination camps? I mean, the evidence is pretty doggone clear. Critical race theory. Do we really need to infest a child's mind with this sort of garbage? We need to teach our kids to think, right? And as the book alludes to, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, the sole idea is that this is by and for the corporations, meaning to turn you into a docile workforce. And it kind of harkens back, and I wish I would have dug up the clip to possibly play here, but George Carlin, you've heard me talk about his stand-up comedy in the past, right? He was very, very truthful in what he said in his comedy stand-up. And one of the things that stands out to me, obviously, is when he said they want you just smart enough to push the buttons, but not dumb enough to ask too many questions. And there's a lot of truth to that, especially based on what we're reading out of this deliberate dumbing down of America. They put you on a pipeline. They put you on the rat race, right? Go through the same remedial crap every single day, the rat race. Get up at 7, say goodbye to your kids, have a little breakfast, do the commute, get to your office by 8 o'clock. Maybe this was the old norm before COVID. Leave by 5, see the kids a little bit, eat, go to bed, wash, rinse, repeat. Is that the way how we're really supposed to live this life? I don't think so. I think there are much better ways. And frankly, the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum types, and that I was just reading an article just before coming on air here out of Zero Hedge, actually the Daily Bell, the populist great upset, decoupling from the corporate state death grip, where we're going to have to break from this system. We're going to have to get local. We're going to have to come up with our own means and ways of doing school in a local fashion to break the grips that these institutions have on us. Couple that with the fact that we're probably going to have to come up with our own means of bartering, as well as monetary systems, perhaps for a short time, trading, whatever goods, services, skills, sets, net that you have on a local level. All of that stuff is going to come to play in order to beat this at the end of the day. And on top of that, let's not also forget that, and I've got this pulled up here, I actually took the time to go through the 1776 report. If you remember right, Donald Trump had a team of folks, and that actually pulled together a report that happened to be kicked out just as he left office and was promptly taken down on day one when Biden got into office, and it became pretty tough to find. I think there's a couple colleges in that. Maybe I think it was Hillsdale that actually has that. I actually took and put it on my Patreon page, the PDF of this thing, but it took about 2 hours to go through the 1776 report. And it combats every single one of these garbage propagandist systems that they want to push through our kids' minds, including critical race theory. It's all in there. Everything that is in the Constitution, within the Bill of Rights, within the Declaration of Independence, all of that is there. That is what we should be teaching our kids. It's why you saw me take the time to go through the Federalist Papers week after week after week after week. Granted, it's probably about time to do it all again, and perhaps maybe include a counterpoint of Federalist Papers to anti-Federalist Papers, just so we can see both sides of the argument and go that route. And on top of that, like I said, I just finished up going through Ayn Rand's The Virtue of Selfishness. Probably the next thing, and this was actually brought up by Flynn in an article about a month or so ago. I think it was Western Journal that carried this article about how few friends he had, as he found at the end of going through what he did. And one of the things that he highlighted is, what do we need to prepare ourselves? Well, Federalist Papers, the Constitution, certainly. Those are things that we've covered. But at the same time, one of the other things that I have read in the past and probably would not hurt to go back through again is Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. And so that's actually going to be the next book in that I'm going to cover. It's probably going to be about 300 and some odd pages. I already have it ready to go. But get out there, get over to my channel and get subscribed. We're going to go through that puppy as well, however long it takes. You guys can jump on over, get subscribed, all that good stuff. And we'll give that a go here, along with everything else and that we do between the channels here. So, long story short, we got a ways to go. We need to break the conditioning. We need to get our kids out of these indoctrination camps. We need to get them back on track. You've heard Mike Lindell talk about this in their Health and Freedom Conference here. You've heard Michael Flynn talk about this in the same conference, and time after time. It's time we do it, right? And let's see. I'll just watch chat here for the last little bit here. See what sort of questions you guys may have. Let me scroll back just a little bit. Yeah, good point. Supplier responsible freedom to all electronic devices. Yeah, obviously, if you've paid any attention to the quote-unquote elites, or the parasitic class, I call them, you know that the people like Steve Jobs and company never provided their own products in the hands of their own kids. Why? Well, because they become addicted and they can't cope. They can't develop the motor skills that are needed at a very young age. And now think, too, what is going on with all this masking up of kids? What is that doing, especially for young kids? I've covered this a little bit in the past in my To Mask or Not to Mask. Kids rely on facial expressions to be able to read folks. At the end of the day, it's not just about your voice and the things you speak. It's about your facial expressions to help understand what somebody is saying. And you take that away, they're kind of lost, and you set them back developmentally. And now think of what that does in terms of the dumbing down of America. You think they want people to be able to read people's expressions? No, they want you docile. They want you just a bot at the end of the day. Just a cog in the machine. That's it. And of course, one of the other things, what did we just find out here in the last week? Didn't they say something? I forget where I read this, that they're actually going to, I think it was out in California, Newsom and company are actually going to revert back kids trying to do advanced courses. And I would only assume that, like in my day, you would be taking college level classes in high school to perhaps get a little bit ahead once you actually do go to college. But yeah, they want to put everybody back on a level playing field. No more advancement, no more getting ahead, no more, advancing yourself for the betterment of yourself because, well, that may be racist, right? I'm sure this all plays very, very conveniently and nicely into the whole critical race theory. So, yeah, we need to get out of the system, and thank God for some of the people that got up and spoke at that Health and Freedom conference a couple weeks back. By the way, if you want to find all the individual uploads of all the various speakers, you can head over to Brighteon.com. That's Mike Adams's site, and that for uploading various videos and whatnot. If you go to his Health Ranger channel, I believe it is, You can find all the various folks in that who spoke at that conference for both days there as well. In case you were wondering, I know some have got it uploaded over on Rumble, and I think that might not be broken out by each individual speaker, but Mike Adams has certainly done that. So. Hey, cute. I've got a question. What's it like being too handsome to turn on your camera? I have no idea. Why don't you tell us, he cute? Do tell. I know a girl that lives on the hill. Yeah. All right. Well. All right. Well, that was a very, very fast hour, as always. And I see that Swaggles and Salty Crystal are in house.
Hey, how's it going?
What's going on, man?
Hey, cute. Would you just leave Breaking Spectre alone? What is up?
Man, I'm used to it, I guess.
I thought he just let bothered me. I guess everyone on the show.
No, I think he's an equal opportunist.
Very nice. Good.
All right, guys, I'll get out of your hair. Have a good evening.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Great
Take
show.
care.
All right, ready to make this happen?
What's up, MAGA?
What's up? Oh, shoot.
Man, come on, man.
I'm just chilling in Cedar Rapids.
There you go. See, the show can't go on.
I know.
The show can't go on without that.
It literally can't.
All right. Ready?
Yeah.
Here we go.
Born ready.
Come on. Whoa, what's that? Oh no, that is not the perfect man. Whoa! Oh, see how you know it's true. You know it's true.
That's hilarious.
The Karen. The Karan.
Oh! Oh, my eyes! Whoa, yeah. Yeah. Ah!
Oh my gosh.
It's true. It's true. So, hey, this is for you. This is for you Road Warriors fans, okay? All right? I heard you don't have to, yield to Antifa blocking the road now, right? I don't know why they decided to put Road Warrior, the 80s classic, into this meme. That could be Donald Trump inside of that. I'm just saying.
You know what? It kind of looks like it a little bit.
Yeah, it looks like that looks like Trump. So, no, what's happening here, folks? But there you go. Welcome to the MAGA Mullet Show.
Yes, welcome to the MAGA Mullet Show. So, how is everybody this evening? How are you doing, Mr. Swaggles? Good. Yeah, so we had our address to Congress yesterday.